Hello and welcome to the setup module for the Windows 8 launch training. In this module we're going to be examining the installation process for Windows 8, which is going to include a walkthrough of the entire installation process, as well as a call out to the changes in this release compared with Windows 7. And we're also going to be talking through what some of the troubleshooting implications of those changes might be. Now, before we get into setup, it's important to understand the system requirements that are out there for a PC that you're going to be installing Windows 8 on. The system requirements for Windows 8 generally match those for Windows 7. There's a change in processor requirements and some additional requirements for new features in Windows 8. But in general, for the processor, you need at least a gigahertz or faster processor with both PAE or physical address extensions and SSE2 support. There's additional information about the specific features that are required in the next topic that we're going to be going into. RAM, you're going to see that there's different requirements for both RAM and hard disk space, whether you're running 32-bit or 64-bit Windows. For RAM, for a 32-bit PC, it needs a minimum of 1 gigabyte of RAM and 16 gigabytes of free space, or hard disk space. And for a 64-bit PC, you need 2 gigabytes of RAM and 20 gigabytes of hard disk space. And of course, for your graphic card, you're going to need to have at least a DirectX 9 graphics device with a WDDM driver. There's additional requirements that are in place if you're going to be using certain features. So, for example, if you're going to be using touch, you're going to need a tablet or a monitor that supports multi-touch. For more information about the Windows 8 touch requirements, there's a blog post out on the Building Windows 8 blog that I want to point you to. The Building Windows 8 blog is one of the resources that we relied upon pretty heavily during the Windows 8 training development process. There's tons of articles on many of the new features or changes that were introduced for Windows 8, usually written by the group or the team that actually was responsible for that feature. So you're going to find a lot of really great in-depth articles on this blog that are really useful if you're thinking about ramping up more on any one particular area for Windows 8. But yes, here's the article on touch hardware in Windows 8. That's definitely a good resource. It's going to give you things like gestures, diagrams for the gestures, and that sort of thing. But I'll leave that to you to read through on your own. Additionally, beyond just the processor requirements and the fact that if you're using touch hardware, we require that you have touch hardware that supports multi-touch. We also have some new requirements related to screen resolution. Before it wasn't as big of an issue, but now with the advent of Windows Store apps and Windows 8, it's going to be important that you have a screen resolution of at least 1024 by 768. If you have a screen resolution lower than that, then you're not going to be able to run Windows Store apps. You'll still be able to access the desktop and use desktop apps. You'll still be able to access the start screen and PC settings, but any app you would have obtained from the Windows Store or that's pre-installed with Windows 8, like Mail or People, those are going to require that you have at least 1024 by 768. Now, Windows Store apps have the ability to run two on the screen at the same time in this view called Snap. You end up with the main app that's taking up the majority of the screen, and the secondary app that's referred to as the Snapped app taking up a 300 pixel wide strip along either the left or the right edge of the screen, depending on how the user configured it, meaning where the user actually dragged and dropped the app to Snap. To be able to use Snap, you need a minimum screen resolution of at least 1366 by 768. In order to install Windows 8, your CPU must now support PAE, NX, and SSE2. PAE is physical address extensions, NX is no execute, and SSE2 is streaming SIMD extensions too. Some CPUs support these features, but they have them disabled in the BIOS. In many cases, Windows 8 can handle enabling these features automatically, but it may be necessary to have the customer verify this in the BIOS. If you use the new web setup method to install Windows 8 on a PC with a processor lacking PAE or SSE2, you're going to see a message indicating that. Let me see if we have a screenshot here. Yeah, your PC CPU isn't compatible with Windows 8. If your CPU supports NX but it is disabled, setup will attempt to enable it during the installation. If this fails for some reason, though, you're going to see a stop error. It's going to be a stop 5D unsupported processor. If this is encountered during an upgrade, setup will roll back to your previous operating system configuration. So if we encounter that stop error during an upgrade from Windows 7 to Windows 8, for example, then we'll immediately just roll you back to Windows 7. In clean installations, you may need to use the windows.old folder to restore the previous operating system, though. This scenario is discussed in the processor compatibility issue topic later on. If you do encounter this error when trying to install Windows 8, there's a sysinternals tool called Core Info that you can use to determine the features that your CPU supports. Let me show you what that tool looks like. Okay. So what I'm going to do here is bring up a command prompt and type core info. I've already downloaded the tool from sysinternals. I just did a Bing search for core info and it was the very first hit. And now that I've downloaded it and I'm running it from the command prompt, I see information about my specific CPU. Now, the part that makes this relevant to what we're talking about here is whenever I scroll up to the top, I see things like PAE for supports greater than 32-bit physical addresses. So you see that there's an asterisk next to that. NX has an asterisk next to that. If I scroll down further, SSE2, it has, again, an asterisk next to that. The asterisk in each of these cases indicates that the CPU supports the features that are required in order to be able to support Windows 8. Now, I kind of started showing you the most complicated way to check this first, but Windows setup on its own, whenever it is going through the compatibility check to see if the PC is going to be capable of running Windows 8, will check for this, and if it sees that your PC doesn't support it, it's going to warn you. Now, there's a way to initiate this check without having to use a command line tool or having to get Windows set up using the Upgrade Advisor. The Upgrade Advisor is a tool that we traditionally put out for Windows releases. There's one for Windows Vista, there was one for Windows 7, and now there's going to be one for Windows 8. And what it is essentially a downloadable tool that you can run on your PC, your existing, like if you have a Windows 7 PC that you want to see if you're going to be able to upgrade it. You can run the Upgraded Advisor and it'll tell you specifically, like, is all the hardware that you have in that PC going to work in Windows 8? Are the drivers that you currently have installed going to be fine, or are you going to need to look for driver updates? Is the software that you have installed on the PC going to be compatible with Windows 8? And if not, are there any updates that are available that would make it so? That's the level of information that the Upgrade Advisor would provide, and it will definitely call out if there's anything lacking with your specific CPU support. Next, we have the installation changes section. So Windows 8 introduces several changes to the installation process. These are mainly going to impact what you see when you start the installation from within Windows. Some of the changes that we're going to be talking through are going to include things like web setup. Web setup is a new feature that makes it easier to purchase Windows online. So with web setup, the Upgrade Assistant feature handles the details of downloading all the Windows 8 installation files and providing the key to set up automatically. But it's essentially just a way for customers to initiate an installation from a website and then go through the entire process to the point where they have Windows 8 on their PC with all through just this website. The next thing is this new consumer-friendly installer. And Windows 8 includes a more consumer-friendly setup interface provided by install.exe in the installation media. And then we have some new installation options. We touched on this a little bit in the overview module when we were talking about migration, but now Windows 8 presents you with 3 clear options for setup. Unlike the upgrade and custom options from earlier releases, the new choices are going to be much clearer as far as the guidance that they provide. Okay, so the first of those that we're going to be talking through is web setup. Web setup is also known as electronic software distribution. It's this new method for purchasing, downloading, and installing Windows. In earlier Windows releases, when you downloaded a Windows installation source, it arrived as a ISO disk image file that had to be burned to a disk before you could use it to install Windows. Now with web setup, you can just download the small upgrade assistant interface directly from the Windows 8 download page, and then this interface will then guide you through all the steps to get Windows 8 and get it installed. There's a few other benefits to using this method. Upgrade Assistant includes a compatibility check, so similar to the Upgrade Advisor I mentioned before, this compatibility check is run automatically and is going to show information on things like DVD playback and secure boot, as well as links to more information or third-party sites for updates. The report provided is intended to be informational, to show details on the program and the hardware compatibility in the PC, but no user action is required there. Also, web setup is automatically going to detect and configure your architecture and language selection. So for example, if you're installing Windows 8 from a 64-bit French Windows 7 PC, then we're automatically going to download 64-bit Windows 8, and we're going to install the French version by default, just because it's going to match what you already have. Then when you're going through the web setup process, product purchase offers are going to be made based on your current Windows installation or your market or the choice of an installation option that you choose. And we'll look at what that means here in a minute. The download is actually done using the Windows Background Intelligent Transfer Service, or BITS. This helps ensure resilient download, and that can be paused, it can be resumed. BITS is used by quite a few different features within Windows. Windows Update uses it to download updates from the Windows Update service. Whenever you install features that are not part of Windows or not included on disk with Windows, like the .NET framework, whenever you go in to turn Windows features on or off, it has to download those bits from the Windows Update service. Actually, again, that's another scenario where it would use the Background Intelligence Service, or BITS, to do that. So, quite a lot of use of BITS in Windows. The online service for the download also provides you your product key to web setup. So web setup in turn passes the key to install.exe. This eliminates the need to type in the product key during setup. We also provide an option to create an ISO file or a bootable flash drive to use in case you're using this method of setup, but your real end goal is to take that copy of Windows 8 and install it on another PC. Well, that would be a scenario where you want to be able to create an ISO file that you can then burn to DVD or create a bootable flash drive, and web setup will walk you through both of those. Once the Upgrade Assistant completes all web setup actions, you'll have a downloaded installation source that can be used to start installing immediately, or it can be used to start it later. If you choose to start the installation later, there's going to be an Install Windows shortcut on the desktop to make that easier. Web setup via the Upgrade Assistant is the recommended path for downloading and installing Windows 8, unless you must change the Windows architecture language versions from the current installed operating system, or you're needing to install to a different partition. Web setup is going to be talked about in much more detail later, though. The next thing we'll talk through is the consumer-friendly installer. So the experience when starting setup from a down level like Windows 7 operating system has changed pretty dramatically for Windows 8. Windows Vista and Windows 7 used the setup.exe based installer that was intended to be this one-size-fits-all solution, which meant that the core functionality could be used in multiple scenarios. So you could use the same setup.exe to do a boot from media-based install, or a start from down-level based install, and even corporate scenarios like using WDS or Pixie-based installations. All of those use the same setup.exe core process. But this is changing for Windows 8. Now we have a new installation process that is targeted specifically for consumer retail scenarios where the installation was started from a down-level Windows operating system. So setup was started from Windows 7 or from Windows XP. Then you'll get this new experience. This is going to be in addition to the web setup functionality, although this works in tandem with that. Web setup relies on this new installer. When setup is initiated by inserting a DVD or a USB key with the installation media, the autorun.inf on the installation media points to a setup.exe file at the root of the media. But this setup.exe is really just a small file that performs a couple of different actions. It's a stub that performs a couple of different actions. First, it sets up the operating environment for install.exe, and then it launches install.exe from the sources folder. So let's take a look at what that actually looks like on the disk. So I have a ISO extracted here out to this folder, and what we're looking at here is just the files on the installation media. And the first thing that you'll see is this autorun.inf. It looks like it's going to just run setup.exe. If it's on a unsupported operating system, it's just going to run setup error. Like for example, if you're on 32-bit Windows and have inserted the 64-bit installation media, it's going to display this error instead. But anyway, so once this launches, it's going to launch this setup.exe, who is then going to launch one of two files depending on where you are at the time. If you're inside of an existing Windows installation, then setup is going to then run under the sources folder this install.exe file, and that is going to be what triggers the consumer-friendly setup that we're talking about here. Now, if we booted from media, if we've done so we booted from a DVD or a USB key, then setup will then, instead of launching install.exe, it will launch again under the sources folder. It'll launch setup.exe. So setup launches setup, but it's just in a different location. So the setup.exe that you see here can be launched automatically, as we mentioned, but you can also manually run this. So if you're seeing any issues with the consumer-friendly version of setup, or if you need to be able to do something like pass switches to setup, then this would be the one to use. And you can do that by either directly running setup from the sources folder, and the experience at that point would look almost identical to installing Windows 7 as far as the setup experience. So yeah, that's what it looks like on disk. Other documentation may refer to this consumer-friendly installer as either setup or advanced setup. So setup, in this case, this is the method of installing Windows that started from down level and uses install.exe. This version is what will be used by the majority of consumers installing their own copy of Windows over an existing down level copy of Windows. And as versus advanced setup, this is the method of installing Windows that started by booting from the DVD or the USB flash drive. This method supports doing things like selecting the installation partition, and using switches to control the behavior of setup. So there's a few different actions that install.exe will perform for you. So install.exe is responsible for guiding you through the initial wizard where information like the following is gathered and actions perform. First, dynamic update is run. So similar to previous Windows setup processes, Windows 8 setup is capable of connecting to Windows Update and downloading any updates to the setup process prior to beginning the installation. You have a choice to opt into this, though. This setting is presented as get the latest. These updates to Windows setup will help make the installation smoother. Next is the Customer Experience Improvement Program. Selecting this sends information about the success or failure of setup back to Microsoft for analysis. This is turned on by default, but you can opt out of it. It's shown as get the latest on the screen where dynamic update is configured. The checkbox option has the text I want to help make the installation of Windows better, as you can see here on the slide. And this option is enabled by default. And then the EULA, or the end user license agreement, you have to agree to the EULA when prompted in order to proceed. The accept button is disabled until you actually go ahead and select that you agree to the EULA. And then a product key. The product key is required for the installation of Windows 8. Depending on how setup is started, the option may be skipped, but in the majority of scenarios, it is not skippable. When you start using web setup, the key is provided to install.exe automatically, though. We have a few new installation options as well, so let me show you what that is going to look like. So when you start setup inside of Windows, using the new default method of the consumer-friendly installer, you have these clear options for migrating your apps, settings, accounts, and data. An example of these options is shown here in the screenshot. The specific options that are provided are going to vary depending on how you actually started Windows. So the table you see on the slide now shows the different migration options that will be presented. So in general, this will be a combination of a few of the items in the list under migration option. So the option for Windows settings, personal files, and apps, this is equivalent to a full upgrade. This is going to be available if you start setup from either Windows 7 or Windows 8. The option to migrate just the Windows settings and personal files, this is going to perform a clean install with the migration of user accounts, files, and settings in the current Windows installation. This is similar to using Windows Easy Transfer with a clean install like we talked about before. You're going to see this option presented to you whenever you're running Windows Vista SP1 or above, anything above that, including Windows 7 and Windows 8. So that means that everything after Windows Vista SP1 is going to see this option. Now the option to migrate just personal files, this performs a clean install and migrates only user accounts and files for users currently configured in Windows. And then nothing. This is basically just a clean install. All installations are going to see this as an option. It basically is just saying, I don't want to bring anything forward. I want a complete fresh start. Make that happen as part of setup. Now, if you do create an installation media and start your PC from that media and then install Windows 8, you won't be able to keep your files, programs, or settings. To keep the files, programs, or settings, you need to start your installation from within Windows itself. All these options include a compatibility check to ensure that there's no blocking issues that would prevent Windows 8 from being successfully installed on the target PC. Setup isn't blocked in situations where Windows 8 can be installed successfully, though. The focus is on providing information on these issues and letting setup proceed. So if we find that an app is known to be incompatible with Windows 8, well, we're still going to let you install Windows 8. We just want you to know that there's probably action that you're going to need to take to make that app compatible once you get there. If setup is blocked for a more serious issue, though, and needs to be restarted after addressing a blocking scenario, it's going to remember any information that was entered or selected, like the product key, the agreement to the EULA, the acceptance of the Customer Experience Improvement Program. All of those choices that you had made up to that point are going to be retained. All that information that you had entered is retained. After providing the requested information, setup just proceeds and is going to reboot multiple times, first into the WinPE phase and then into the first boot phase. After finishing the installation, you're going to see the Windows Welcome interface. So let's take a second to look at each of these different installation options. The first is upgrade, and in Windows 7 terms, this is an upgrade installation. The option to migrate everything is available when installing for Windows 7 or when installing Windows 8 over itself as an in-place upgrade. The migrate everything installation proceeds in these steps. User accounts, data files, settings, and apps are collected. The previous installation is moved to a windows.old directory, so that means your Windows program files x86, users directory, documents and settings if it exists, program data, all of these folders that were part of the previous installation that were on the root of the system drive are moved completely into this windows.old directory. If you want more details about the way that works, then really in the way that upgrades installations work, I suggest you take a look at our Windows New Hire training as well, because it has a lot more of that background information that we're not going into here in this training, since it's assumed knowledge. So after this, then a clean installation is performed. So we moved your previous install out of the way to this windows.old directory. Then we clean install to the PC, and then we take all that previously gathered user accounts, data files, settings, and apps, and then apply them to the new installation. So in the middle, though, you're definitely getting the benefit of a clean install. This is done in generally the same way as on Windows 7, except for the second step there. The Windows.old folder was only created during a clean installation of previous Windows versions. Windows 8 uses this folder for the app and data migration rather than the previous temporary folder paths like Windows-Q and Windows-TR. This is great news for from a troubleshooting standpoint, though, because it means that if there's an issue with migration, you can use this folder as a source for recovering files. The other options that we look at are migrate settings and data, migrate data, and migrate nothing. Migrate settings and data is just an easier method that combines the benefits of Windows Easy Transfer into the consumer-friendly install.exe setup engine. The same set of data migrated by Windows Easy Transfer in its default configuration is what is migrated with this option. So user accounts, user configuration information, and files. App settings for third-party apps will also be migrated, but those apps themselves will need to be reinstalled. As with the full upgrade or the full migration, the Windows.old directory is created during the installation, and if there's an issue with migration, you can use this folder as a source for recovering files. For the migrate data option, and here, let me bring up the table again that we were looking through. Yeah, so for the migrate data option, which is here referred to as just personal files, here Windows.old is created during this installation, and if there's an issue with the migration, you can use this folder as a source for recovering files. And the same is true for migrate nothing as well. Alright, so the next thing we're going to be looking at is the setup flow, what setup looks like within Windows. We're not going through all of the different possible flows because the majority of them, like whenever you're installing from down level, are very much the same as what you see in Windows 7. So it's because this training is really focused on what's new and different for Windows 8, we're only going to be talking about the setup flow from within Windows because that's where the majority of the changes have come. So this provides an overview of what the setup flow actually looks like. Web setup handles the majority of this, and we're assuming a web setup in the flow that we're going to be showing you. Web setup is going to first check compatibility, and then it's going to take you through the purchase process. Then it's going to help you obtain the product key, download the bits from the server, and then start setup or create the installation media, depending on what the user chooses. And then after that, the down level phase is going to be very similar to what you've seen before. And then finally, Windows Welcome, where the user will go through and configure their installation of Windows to their PC. So the different purchase methods that are available for Windows 8 are shown here on the screen. There's three different areas that we're talking through. We're talking about purchasing Windows 8 by purchasing online from Microsoft, purchasing online from a third-party retailer, or purchasing a box product. If you purchase online, then if the difference is going to be So if you purchase online from Microsoft, you start setup from a Windows website on Microsoft.com, and it downloads the Upgrade Assistant and goes through all of the steps that you see here listed: check compatibility, purchase, obtain product key, download, start setup, or create install media. So nearly the end-to-end experience, especially from a support perspective, is owned by Microsoft in that case, versus an online purchase from a retailer. In this case, the customer's gone to a site like Amazon.com or something like that, and they've purchased Windows 8 as a digital download version. And they're able to trigger the installation to begin from there, but what happens after the purchase is complete is then Amazon kicks off the installation, but the installer itself, the bits download, all of that is owned by Microsoft. So it's very much the same experience that the customer sees whenever they go through online purchase from Microsoft, except for the first few bits: the check compatibility, purchase, and obtain product key. So the setup interface itself actually kicks off at the download phase. And then finally, purchase a box product. So you've gone into a store and you purchase a box that said Windows 8 on it. Now this could be a DVD copy, and that's what it normally is traditionally, but we'll also make available basically it's just a product key that you can use for the installation of Windows. So you can purchase it from the store, get the product key that you need to kick off setup, and then you'll go to the website and actually start the download and installation process from there, and just plug in the information that you got from the voucher within that box product. In this case, starting setup within Windows uses install.exe, but bypasses some of the web setup steps. So in all the purchase methods shown above, you will receive a compliance checking Windows 8 product key, also known as an upgrade key. When you install with this key type, Windows Setup checks for a previous Windows installation on the PC. This is satisfied by running setup within Windows or by booting from the installation media on a PC where Windows is installed on a local hard drive. When you install this way, Windows 8 is aware of the previous Windows installation and can activate your compliance checking key even though you didn't upgrade from a previous Windows installation. If you want to install or reinstall Windows on a PC, then your previous Windows version should be installed first. This is the same as using an upgrade key when installing Windows 7. If for some reason you can't have your previous Windows version installed before you kick off setup for Windows 8, Windows 8 will still accept your key. You'll be able to install Windows 8, but you will encounter an activation error, 0xC004F061, once installation is complete. We talk more about this error and what you can do about it once we get to the activation module next. Now let's start looking through what the customer experience will be, what the customer will actually see when they're going through web setup. The very first thing that the customer will see will be a screen like this indicating that setup is currently checking compatibility. This comes up whenever you first open up the Windows 8 Upgrade Assistant, which happens whenever you start the purchase of Windows 8 from the Microsoft.com Windows 8 page. This is your interface for web setup, the Upgrade Assistant, guiding you through all the steps needed to make Windows 8 ready to install. After the compatibility check, we're going to show you the results of that check here, and in this case you see we found some things for your apps and devices are compatible, but there's 2 items you need to review. If you want to get more information about the items that were found, you can click through on the See Compatibility Details link, and what that's going to show is a screen similar to this, where we can see all of the different compatibility details. In this case, we see things like the fact that Secure Boot isn't compatible with your PC. In this case, the PC is using the legacy BIOS instead of the new UEFI-based firmware. So because of that, it can't support Secure Boot. So we are notifying the user of that. Also, we're notifying the user that their screen resolution isn't going to be compatible with Snap. It isn't at least 1366 by 768. And we'll also show you some additional hardware that and whether or not it's compatible or not compatible. All the compatibility results, everything that is determined by the compatibility checker, is saved to a file called detailed report.html. And this is saved to a folder in your Windows directory, in your application data directory under Microsoft Web Setup Panther. After setup is complete, you can find this file in the Windows Panther folder. So let me bring that up, or just so you can see an example of what I'm talking about. Now, I didn't actually do a web setup on this particular PC, but the end result is going to be much the same. Here, in this case, my Panther folder is instead in my Windows directory. Panther is the name of the logging engine within Windows, that Windows uses for setup. And you're going to see the same Panther folder whether you install Windows 7 or Windows 8. And as you go through setup, the location of the Panther folder will move as you go from phase to phase to phase. But the end result is that you'll have this Panther directory that has all of the logs that were generated during the Windows setup process, including things like your setup act and your setup ERR log files. Setup act is going to show you all the activity that took place during the Windows setup process. And if there was any errors that occurred during setup, those errors will also be logged in setup act, but they will be mirrored to setup ERR.log. Setup ERR is going to, in the end, is going to only contain errors that occurred during setup. So if you are troubleshooting an issue and you want to figure out what the failure looks like, well, then odds are you can just go into the setup ERR file, get the failure, get the error, and use that to begin your research. In some cases, though, you're going to need to find that error, find that specific line, and go find the corresponding line in the setup act.log. And look at the activity that was happening immediately before it, because it may be that the specific error that you see isn't enough to actually begin your troubleshooting. You're going to need some additional information beyond that, like knowing what led up to that, and the setup act will be able to tell you that. The next step for web setup and the upgrade assistant is to ask what elements of the current configuration you want to keep. You'll only see the migration options that are available to you based on your current Windows version. The selection is needed prior to purchase in order to determine what Windows 8 options to list in the next step. If you're running Windows 7 Pro or Ultimate, and the Windows settings, personal files, and apps option is selected here, then you're going to see a screen very similar to this. Now, this is just showing sample data that was present during a point in time earlier in the development process. So it'll actually be Windows 8 here in this case, or Windows 8 Pro, depending. So anyway, regardless, so if you're running Windows 7 Pro or Ultimate and the Windows settings, personal files, and apps option was selected, then there's only one choice of Windows 8 edition that you're going to see. The only full migration path from these Windows 7 editions is to Windows 8 Pro, and this is what's shown in this mock-up. So this is intended to represent Windows 8 Pro in this case. Now, if you're running a lower edition of Windows 7, or if you selected something other than a full migration in the previous step, you're going to see both Windows 8 and Windows 8 Pro offered, similar to what you see here in this screenshot. Again, it's just sample data for this case. Next, once you click the Buy button on one of those, you're going to begin going through the purchase experience. So the first thing you're prompted to do is enter all of your billing information. Next, you're asked to enter your payment information. This could be either credit card or PayPal. Now, these options may differ in the final release of Windows 8, and they may also differ by locale. Now, if you select credit card here, then you're going to see a screen similar to this where you're just prompted to enter your credit card information. The PayPal option will take you through the typical PayPal experience, which you could see beginning here. You just click through on checkout with PayPal, and it's going to take you out of setup and into the PayPal experience. So once your payment's entered and you click next, the order confirmation is going to be shown. A sample order confirmation screen is shown here in the screenshot. If you're purchasing Windows 8 using the Windows 8 upgrade offer, the promo code field is where you're going to enter the code for this discounted offer. Be sure to click apply and confirm that you see the promotional pricing before clicking next, though. Once you do click next in the payment confirmation, the upgrade assistant completes the order with the e-commerce infrastructure, and then it's going to grab you a product key, which you can see here. Now the product key that you'll see is going to be the full 5x5. The example you see here in the screenshot has been modified to hide the product key, but you'll see, this is the screen where you'll see that full 5x5 key. You can also click on the view receipt link down on the bottom to get another view of the key, as well as just confirmation information, the receipt for your purchase, basically. At this point, the Windows 8 installation source is going to be downloaded by bits. This step shows an estimate of the time remaining, as well as a pause button so that the user can control when web setup is going to use the internet connection. If the download process is interrupted for whatever reason, you can use the download Windows shortcut on the desktop to resume where it left off. So we'll create that shortcut for you right there on the desktop. The download is followed by steps that verify download integrity and prepare the download installation source for use. You'll see this reported as checking the download and getting files ready. If there was an issue with the downloaded file, you may see some additional steps where the upgrade assistant performs some type of self-correction to obtain a good file. At this stage, though, there's also a check for dynamic updates. If updates are found, the installation source is updated with these latest improvements. And then once the steps are complete, the installation source files are going to be in your C:/ESD/Windows folder, which is the location used to launch install.exe. And this is what you will see at that point. So when the installation source is ready, you're going to be given these three choices depending on whether or not you want to install over the top of your current Windows installation, whether you want to create installation media, or if you want to perform the installation later. So what happens is going to depend on which option you select. The first one is pretty obvious. It just proceeds with setup. The second one is going to walk you through a secondary process that we're going to talk about here in a second that you can use to create an ISO file, which can be burnt to a DVD, or create a bootable USB flash drive, which then either of those can be used to install on the same PC or another PC with the same architecture. And then that last option is just going to create a shortcut on your desktop called Install Windows, and that can be used to pick up the setup process at any point in time later on. Next, we get to the down level phase. So if you continue on with the installation by clicking Install Now before, web setup starts the down level setup by launching install.exe from the sources folder. From the C:/ESD/Windows folder. You'll go directly into down level setup if you start setup from a Windows 8 DVD within a running Windows operating system as well. This section describes the steps performed during the down level phase, so we're just going to go through what a down level phase looks like regardless of whether or not it was entered through web setup or some other means. So the first step is that setup.exe is started from the installation media, which in turn starts install.exe. The second step is that you need to click accept on the user account control if you're prompted. And then After that, you're going to see a screen like you see here in the slide, which is that dynamic update is offered, along with the option to opt out of the customer experience improvement program for Windows 8 setup, as you see here on the bottom where it says, I want to help make the installation of Windows better. And then after you click next above, you click next on the previous screenshot, you're going to see that we're going to go out and start using dynamic update to check for any updates to the setup engine. And then next, setup is going to verify that the PC meets the system requirements, and this is going to be a check for things like processor requirements or system memory or other attributes like that. And then setup, as you see here, is going to verify the product key. If the key is included as part of the installation process, then this is never going to be something that the user sees. This is the case for web setup, so web setup just provides the product key to the setup engine as part of the way that it works, so the user would never actually see this screen and would never need to enter their product key. If the product key, though, hasn't been provided, such as for an installation started directly from a DVD, then you're going to see this product key prompt. Next, you're prompted to agree to the EULA, the End User License Agreement. And this is where you get asked what you want to keep. So keep Windows settings, personal files, and apps is going to do that full upgrade we were talking about. Keep personal files only is only going to do a migration. And then nothing is going to do just a clean install of Windows for you. This option is only going to be shown if you didn't indicate your preference earlier. Similar to the product key prompt, you can expect to see this when starting setup from a DVD or when starting setup later from a downloaded source. Next, setup is going to perform a compatibility check. This is going to ensure that there's no problems or conflicts that would prevent you from being able to install Windows 8. And now, if setup does find that there's something that needs to be fixed or something that needs to be changed, then you're going to be told at this point, as shown here. If any of the changes that are needed don't require a reboot, then you can just click on the refresh button down on the bottom, and that item will then be removed from the list. If there are only items that didn't require a reboot in that list previously and the list is now empty, then you should be able to go on and proceed. This step could require changes such as restarting to complete pending actions, to suspend BitLocker protection, or any other action that could create an issue during the installation process. Actions that don't require a restart, for those actions you can use the button for the change and the return to this step to continue without restarting setup. So what I mean by the button for the change, like in the example you see here on the screenshot, the change is restart PC. The PC needs to be restarted before you can proceed. So in that case, just click on restart PC and the restart will kick off. And then if a restart is required after the restart, then you're going to see a screen like this. It's just going to pop right up as soon as you are logged back into Windows. And it's going to ask, are you ready to install Windows? You can choose to continue where you left off, which means that you're not going to need to do anything like re-enter your product key or make any of the other choices that you had made already up to this point. Or you can just restart the whole process if that's what you prefer by selecting that option here. And at this point, setup is just confirming the next steps that it will take based on the choices you've made. So clicking the change selection link that we see here will take you back to the what would you like to keep step, and so that you can make a change to that selection. And then, but if you're cool with all of the summary here, all the choices that you've made so far, then click on install, and what is going to happen is we're going to switch out of that windowed interface into a full screen setup. So it's going to take over the entire display, and then it's going to begin actually doing the work of installing Windows on the PC. you'll see this full screen, black screen, throughout the majority of the setup process. And this is where the setup, this is the way that setup looks now whenever it's doing the work of actually installing Windows. Generally speaking, you're going to see a progression of screens and around 3 restarts that's going to show you things like a restart and then preparing with percentage and then another restart, please wait, preparing, getting devices ready, getting system ready, preparing again, finally a restart, and then if moving your settings, but this is only going to appear if you're installing with the data migration option enabled. And then once that last step is complete, you should be done and you're with setup, and you'll be dropped off at the Windows welcome phase. Yeah. So what Windows welcome is it's a wizard that guides you through the initial setup and personalization of Windows on your PC. It's also sometimes referred to as the UBI, or out-of-box experience, or the first-run experience in other Microsoft products. Windows Welcome is the first part of setup that most users are going to see whenever they start a new PC for the first time that was pre-installed with Windows 8. This series of screenshots that we're going to be looking at will kind of illustrate the overall process of Windows Welcome. So the very first thing that you're seeing is a choice. You need to select the color that will be used for your background, for your theme, and what this is going to do, this is going to immediately change the color of Windows Welcome, but it's also going to have an effect on the start screen once you get there. So the start screen will take on these colors, the PC settings interface will take on these colors, everything that uses any of the new Windows UI will take on that color set that you select from here. You're also going to need to enter your computer's name here. So what would you like your PC to be called? Now it should be called out that if you enter a name and then click next and then decide after that you want to change that name, well, when you click back, the PC name field will actually be grayed out. You'll see the original name that you entered, but you won't have the option to change that. And the reason for that is that whenever you click next on this screen, that's when we begin starting the networking services that are required to enable the functionality of later screens that require us to connect to the internet. And in order for those services to start, we have to have a host name in place. And so that's what you've just set up here. But once the host name is defined and the networking services are started, it can't be changed again without restarting everything. So we don't have a mechanism for doing that within the context of Windows Welcome. So if you do decide after clicking next that you want to change your computer name, just restart the PC, and it'll drop you right back here, or finish Windows Welcome and then from the desktop go into System Properties and make the change from there. After that, if you have a wireless adapter for which Windows 8 includes drivers in the box, you're going to be prompted to select your wireless network from the list of available networks. Each network is going to show the signal strength, and a warning shield is going to be shown for unencrypted networks. If you configure your wireless network to prevent SSID broadcast, it's not going to appear in this list. We don't provide any functionality here for connecting to hidden wireless networks. So just select connect to a wireless network later, and again, you're going to need to configure that connection once you're actually in Windows. Once you select your wireless network, you're going to need to choose whether or not it's always automatically going to connect by checking that box that you see. And what should happen, it looked like we had some duplicates. Yes, so what happens is that after you select that you want to connect automatically, you're going to be prompted for the password for the wireless network. You just need to enter that and then click connect. Now, this is the first instance of a password field that we've seen in Windows 8 as we've gone through the training, and I want to take the opportunity to call something out about Windows 8. Now, you don't actually see it here, but there is something useful about this password field, especially on a touch device, which is the fact that you can check that box for hide characters and it'll make the password visible so you know what you've typed in. This is going to be especially useful if you're on a touch-only device and you're going through setup, because that means you're probably using the touch keyboard, and without that tactile response that you get from typing on physical keys, it can be it's possible to easily type the wrong key. So checking the hide characters box will allow you to verify what it is you've typed before you move on. But what I was saying in relation to other password fields within Windows 8 is that once you get to like the login screen or to where anywhere you're being prompted for a password, where it would normally hide the text that you're entering, there is now a little icon down at the end of the password entry field that you can tap or just press and hold on. And while you're holding down on that icon, it will reveal the password text, which is again going to be useful, very useful for touch-only devices, I think. After you enter your password and you click next or connect, you're going to need to configure some other initial settings related to different services and features provided by Windows and Windows Live. If you could choose the Express settings, and this is going to set the defaults for everything and skip you straight to the sign-on step of the wizard. But you can also choose to customize, and the customize button is going to basically just display all of the options that individually. So instead of just accepting the defaults for everything, the user can then just pick and choose each individual little item, and I'll show you what that actually looks like. So first thing is, and this is going through the customized path, but the first thing is you're prompted to choose whether or not you want to enable file sharing for the network you're connecting to. So in previous versions of Windows recently, you've noticed a prompt for, whenever you first connect to a new network, to choose whether it's a public network, a home network, a work network. All of these apply different firewall configurations and allow access to different sets of services on your PC. This overall configuration has been simplified. The choices that we present to the end user are simplified. Now it's just a yes or no. Do you want to turn on sharing or not? You'll see it here in Windows Welcome, but you'll also be able to get at this option by right-clicking on a network from the View Available Networks interface that you see whenever you click on the network icon down in the system tray. So yeah, select whether or not you want to share with this network, and then after that, you're going to see a series of screens with just different options that you can choose from related to things like configuring Windows Update, or whether or not you want to help protect your PC from malicious files using Smart Screen here. Here's other options related to reporting information back to Microsoft to improve the overall Windows and ecosystem experience. Check online for solutions to problems, share information with your apps, and then that's it. So as you can see, there's three sets of screens that you end up skipping by clicking the default option. I'm not counting the first option because that's something that you probably are going to need to change once you're in Windows anyway, and connecting and disconnecting from network to network. All right, so anyway, had you selected Express, you would have been dropped off at this screen, and this is the first screen where you're prompted to enter anything like a user account that you're going to sign in with. Now, the default option for creating an account in Windows 8 is to use this new concept that we have called a connected account. What this does is uses your Microsoft account and password to sign on to Windows. The email address here provided should be a Microsoft account, although if you don't have a Microsoft account and you want to, you can actually create one from this interface. If you don't want to create a connected account, if you don't want to use anything related to connected accounts, you can always just click on the link down at the bottom for sign in without a Microsoft account. And that's going to take you to an experience where you can choose to sign in using the more traditional local account, where you're prompted to enter a username, the password twice, and then a hint. In this case, you're just asked to enter the password, and then we're going to go up to the service. You're asked to enter the email address, and we're going to go up to the service on Windows Live to verify whether or not that account is indeed a Microsoft account or not. Now, if you have a Microsoft account or a Live ID that you use with Xbox or Windows Phone, using that same account with Windows 8 is going to give you a much more seamless experience. After you enter your Microsoft accounts, oh, and I should also call out. So I mentioned you can create a Microsoft account from here, which sounds like it's creating another email address, which it is. You can also, if you have a Microsoft account, just enter it here, and that will be what you use to sign in with. But if you use a third-party email, if you use Gmail or AOL or Yahoo or something like that for your mail, you can enter that email address here, and what we'll do is we'll take you through the process of configuring that account to be a Microsoft account. So we don't move your mail or do anything to change the way that you sign into those services. We just create a new Microsoft account with the same email address as the third-party email address that you plugged in there, and then you're going to be prompted to enter a password and other information to create that account. We'll talk about that a little bit more here in a second, but I say all that to say that if you do have a third-party email account, you can totally use that here and use it as a Microsoft account, not compromising or changing the way that you use that third-party account. So you get all the great benefits of having a connected account while still using the email address that you're already comfortable with. Okay. So after you enter your Microsoft account and you click Next, you're going to be prompted to enter the password for your Microsoft account. The email address field will automatically be populated with the Microsoft account that you entered on that last step. And then when you click Next, you're going to be prompted to enter some verification information. So let's take a look at what that looks like. So the verification information that we're going to be asking you for is going to be things like a phone number, an alternate email address, a secret question, and an answer. Now the security verification information that we're going to ask for may be different depending on the state of your current account. Whether you're creating an account, whether you're signing in for the first time into Windows 8, whether you have an existing account that doesn't have sufficient security verification information, all of these are factors that could change the number of fields that you're going to be prompted with here. The purpose of these fields is to make it to where if your Microsoft account is ever compromised, we have some secondary piece of information that can be tied back to you to identify that you are who you say you are whenever you call into Microsoft account support to get your password reset or to recover your account or something like that. Now, previously, when you were prompted for your email address, you saw this option for sign up for a new email address. So if you were to click through on that link, that's going to take you over to a screen that looks something like this. This is just going to walk you through the experience of creating a new email address that is a Microsoft account. It looks like it's defaulting to hotmail.com. I would not be surprised if that changed to outlook.com in the future. No guarantees, just speculation, but that seems to be the direction things are going. The next step then prompts for, after you've entered all this and you click Next, the next step is going to prompt you for some additional information. Things like birthday, gender, a reCAPTCHA, which is there to prevent automation attacks or people using this interface to automate the creation of multiple Microsoft accounts. That's what the reCAPTCHA is intended to prevent. But anyway, once you enter all this information, you click Next, and at that point you're signed in to Windows. Now, we looked at another option. Let me jump back again. There's this last option here at the bottom for sign in without a Microsoft account. So if you just don't want to use a connected account for whatever reason, then you can click on this, and what it's going to do is take you to a screen that's first going to explain what the differences are between a Microsoft account and a local account. So you see here with the Microsoft account, we're going to do things like automatically sign you into Microsoft services like the Windows Store or Hotmail. We're going to sync your PC settings between Windows 8 PCs. So if you add favorites or change your desktop background on one Windows 8 PC, those changes will be automatically synced to any other Windows 8 PC that you're signed in with the same Microsoft account. And apps can sync settings back and forth between each Windows 8 PC as well. So there's a lot of goodness that using a Microsoft account gets you, but that's not the only option. So if you prefer to use the local account, then you can use this option here and just select local account, and you're going to be prompted for things like your username, password, and a hint. Same types of things that we asked for before in Windows 7 when creating a local account. The next thing we're going to be looking at is the setup flow whenever you've booted from media. So in general, what it looks like is you boot the computer with a DVD or a USB flash drive. Once you're prompted, you click install, and then you're going to need to do things like enter your product key, select the installation type, and then installation is going to proceed until you restart, and there's going to be a series of restarts that occur until finally you're left at the same Windows welcome we saw previously. Now, up to the first restart, and really behind the scenes for all of it up until you get to Windows welcome, the experience is very similar to Windows 7. If you already have familiarity with troubleshooting Windows 7, you understand where the logs are and what to do to troubleshoot specific scenarios related to setup in Windows 7, then you already know how to troubleshoot the majority of scenarios for Windows 8 as well, which is pretty cool from a support perspective, I think. Alright, so we're going to walk through, again, screenshot style, what the boot from media experience looks like. And as I mentioned from the flowchart previously, you start off by booting the computer from a DVD or USB flash drive, and then here on this screen, you just select the option for install now. Next, that's going to load the installer. It's going to bring up setup.exe, which will display its interface, and the first thing that it's going to do is prompt you for your product key. Now, because the product key entry screen is not optional in Windows 8 like it was in Windows 7, and the key you receive with a retail purchase of Windows 8 is a compliance checking key, your previous Windows version must be installed somewhere on the PC before you can complete the installation. You don't need to browse for it or anything, but setup is automatically going to poke each of your individual partitions to look for a Windows installation that's valid as for the compliance check on upgrade. And then we click next after entering the product key, of course, and you need to choose your installation type. Now, here it falsely makes you think that you have two choices, upgrade and custom. Similar to Windows 7 though, upgrade doesn't really do anything. It just takes you to a screen that warns you, hey, if you want to perform an upgrade, you need to boot into Windows and start setup from there. So it's just a warning flow instead of anything that will result in any particular action being taken. If you actually want to go through the process of installing Windows, though, you need to click Custom here, the advanced option. So once you click Custom, installation is going to proceed much the same way as it did with previous Windows versions. You'll see things like selecting the drive and partitioning the drive that you're going to install to. You'll have the ability to install things like storage controller drivers if you need to install like the driver for your RAID controller or something like that. That experience is still very much the same. So good news there. Okay, so and then after that we go through a series of restarts, and it's going to be very similar to what we looked at a second ago, and then we arrive at Windows Welcome. Okay, so the next thing we're going to be looking at is dual boot. So what does it mean to dual boot in Windows 8? Configuring dual boot can be done by booting from the media and then choosing a custom installation, because we don't, whenever you're whenever you are running the consumer-friendly version of setup, it never actually prompts you for a partition to install to. You need to go into that the advanced setup interface to make that choice. So anyway, and booting from media will get you there by default automatically. So configuring a dual boot installation can be done by booting from the media and choosing a custom installation. As with Windows 7, if you install to a different partition or drive from your current Windows installation, you end up in a dual boot configuration. Setup automatically does the magic of configuring the BCD, the boot menu, with both operating system entries so that they're both accessible. And then after you install Windows 8 to a partition that does not contain the current Windows installation, then you're going to see a new entry, a new boot menu, really, whenever you start up. Now, this is the first opportunity that we've had to see what the new boot interface looks like, and this is a change, a pretty drastic change from the old boot menus that you'd seen in all previous Windows versions, because it was always about a command prompt showing text mode information. There, you would have seen a list with Windows 8, Windows 7, and a bunch of other text on a black screen that you had to navigate about with a keyboard. But now, all of the boot interfaces, everything that you see related to booting into Windows, there is no longer anything that you would see a text-only interface. Everything looks like this new Windows UI style of interface. So it's some of the benefits of that, and we'll talk more about this later once we get to start up, but some of the benefits of that is that this interface is mouse enabled, and it's also touch friendly, so you get access to your touch hardware before you even boot into Windows, and you can use that to navigate around and do things like dual boot on a tablet if you wanted to. So, and then if you were to go through on the bottom and select change defaults or choose other options, you're going to be taken to a separate menu that's going to give you these options. You'll have things like change the timer, choose a different default operating system. What that's going to do is make it to where whenever the PC boots up and you're not in front of it, it's going to choose which operating system it will be booted into. And then there's additional options that you can get to by clicking on that bottom button, but I'm going to save that for the later discussion around the new boot menu. Okay, in this next section we're going to be talking through some of the details related to web setup. So when the upgrade assistant is downloaded and run, it expands all of the web setup components into this folder in your application data folder, which is %local app data called Microsoft/web setup/sources. A shortcut named install Windows is also placed on the desktop, and it's pointing to the web setup.exe in this location. The shortcut can be used to relaunch setup later if you want to. If you complete the Windows 8 download process, the shortcut on the desktop will point to websetup.exe/late elevated. This causes web setup to start directly to the install options step shown at the end of the web setup phase topic earlier in the module. At this step, the user is given the choice to install now or to install to another partition in order to create a bootable installation media. Now, as far as logging in web setup, all of the logs are saved in the user profile of the user who ran setup in this location. Here's the %local app data path that I was talking about. Microsoft Web Setup Panther being the logging engine. If you choose to start an installation directly from web setup, the log files in this location are going to be used to start the install.exe logging. This ensures that you have a setup.act.log that shows the full end-to-end installation from the start of web setup through to the end of Windows Welcome. Okay. Now the web setup uses bits to download the Windows 8 installation files from a regionally distributed server. This helps to make the download process go quickly as possible. You can use the bitsadmin.exe or the PowerShell bits commandlets to view the job status. Here in the web version of the training, you see a sample of what happens when you run bits admin /info Windows DLP Manager, which is the name of the bits job used for web setup, /verbose, and it's just showing us an example of what that bits admin command looks like, who the owner is, the current status. You can run this multiple times and make to verify that that status number is actually increasing. Error count, this is going to be useful for determining if there's been any problems with the download. Retry delay, here you can see the actual path to the file that's being downloaded. That's pr.win.esd.microsoft.com and long path there, as well as the file that it's actually being copied to locally. Okay, so that could be useful to you as well. So the download process, all of its logging is going to happen in the setup act.log primarily. The error results again can be found in setup err.log. An example of the text error returned by bits that you would see here is logon failure, unknown username, or bad password. In this case, you're going to see an error like this if you need to authenticate in order to connect, which is typically what you're going to see with something like a proxy server. The code that follows the error in this example is not the error code returned by bits, though. If you need the error code if you need the error code, you may need to open the setup act.log, search for the error text, and then locate the error code in the preceding line of the log file. In this case, the actual error code was 807052E. Okay. Next thing we're going to talk through is what it looks like to create installation media. So at the end of web setup, choosing the option to install to another partition gave you the opportunity to create Windows 8 installation media. This could be either a USB flash drive or an ISO file that would be burned to a DVD. Once it's been created, this installation media can be used to install Windows 8 in the same way as a retail DVD, by either booting from the media to install or running setup from within Windows. Here in the slide, we see the first step in the media creation process. The user is just prompted to either create a USB flash drive or an ISO file. If they select the option for USB flash drive, they're going to see a screen similar to this. It's just going to show a list of all the USB flash drives, and if there are multiple drives, then you're going to need to select from one of them. Next, Next comes a warning that the flash drive is going to be formatted, and then the copy process proceeds with an indication of % completion. When the USB flash drive copy process is complete, you'll see a final message like we see here on the screen. It's important to write down this product key, though, as this is going to need to be entered manually once you get to setup, unlike web setup that is able to hand the product key directly to the installer. Because we're going to another PC, we don't have an option to integrate the product key in that way. So very important to write it down. So next, if you were to choose the option to create an ISO file, the first thing you're going to be prompted for is with a file save dialog. It's going to default to the documents library, and it's going to default to a file name of windows.iso. You can put this anywhere, it doesn't really matter. It's just a recommendation and a default. As with the USB flash drive, though, when the ISO file creation process is complete, the product key is shown, which we see here. In addition, you see a link to the full path of the ISO file and a link to open the DVD burner. Windows includes a DVD or ISO file burner natively has since Windows 7. So this is just going to launch that burner here and with the ISO file mounted so that you can create your DVD to use to install Windows. This is what the Windows Disk Image Burner looks like. Okay. And then once the burn is complete, then your DVD is ready. Next, we're going to talk through some of the key web setup paths that you should be aware of. Your desktop. The desktop is important because that's where we're going to be putting all the shortcuts in case setup is interrupted at any point and you want to be able to resume at some point in the future. So anytime we want to make it to where the user is able to just pick back up where they left off, we're just going to drop a shortcut on the desktop that they can use for that purpose. The second path that we're looking at in your %local app data % folder under Microsoft Web Setup, this contains the web setup engine and support files like the Panther folder, which we use for logging. And then finally the C:\esd\Windows. This is the location where the complete installation source is located when web setup is complete. So when we actually download all of the files from the internet, this is where they get downloaded to. Alright. And then the next section, and I believe this is the final section of the setup module, is troubleshooting. So the troubleshooting topics related to Windows 8 setup are discussed here, but the troubleshooting and the logging, as you've heard throughout this, I've been mentioning same as Windows 7, same as Windows 7, no different from Windows 7. Because of that, that makes it much easier to support setup for Windows 8. All of the experience we already have, the knowledge we already have, the majority of that is still going to apply, which is pretty great. Troubleshooting and logging is, again, largely the same as with Windows 7 setup, but the major exception is web setup. Web setup is a completely new concept. Troubleshooting for web setup is discussed below, along with a few other troubleshooting topics. So the next thing that we will be talking through is web setup troubleshooting. Troubleshooting for web setup is really going to depend on the stage of web setup where the issue occurred. For any stage, you can look at the log files, which is going to be in the Panther folder under your application data folder. Errors during key acquisition or download should be in the setup err.log. Just troubleshoot as you would similar issues outside of the context of setup. Once web setup is complete and the main setup engine install.exe has started, log data is saved to the same locations as on Windows 7. This includes the web setup log entries, which are moved to the main setup log. So issues related to check compatibility. So if you encounter an issue during the initial compatibility check, there's a couple of actions that you can look at. If there's a compatibility issue flagged in the report, web setup can simply be closed and the action taken on the PC to resolve the concern. Then just restart the upgrade assistant to continue. If there's a problem completing the compatibility check, there may be issues on the PC that could interfere with the setup. Consider doing things like simplifying your hardware configuration, remove unneeded hardware. If you have any cards or USB devices that are attached, remove them and try again. Try performing a clean boot. Similarly, use msconfig to ensure that third-party apps and other apps that are not core to Windows are not starting up as part of Windows, because that can cause problems in some cases. And then there's other troubleshooting that you can use to remove potential problem software from the PC. If the upgrade assistant determines that the PC is not compatible with Windows 8, setup is not going to continue. This is a good thing, though, as it's going to prevent a purchase of Windows 8 for a PC that's not actually compatible with Windows 8. The next set of issues that we're going to be talking through is purchase issues. So customers may report two different types of purchase issues. This could be a purchase done within the Upgrade Assistant interface and a purchase done from the from an online store and fulfilled via download in the web setup interface. So if they made the purchase through the Upgrade Assistant, this is going to be supported by Microsoft. Now, if we're talking about purchasing from an online store, like from a third party, then the place that the customer would go for support would depend on what phase during setup the failure actually occurred. So if there's a problem during product selection, adding to the cart, payment, anything like that, that would all go back to the online retailer for support. After that, if there's any problems related to download, installation, problems related to setup in general, those would all be supported by Microsoft. So next, we're going to be talking about the product key. So as you see from the note here, once the product key has been retrieved and the download started, don't re-download the web setup tool from the web and run it from the PC. This would create a new temporary folder, replacing the saved purchase and key information. If you need to restart web setup, use the Install Windows or Download Windows shortcut on the desktop. Customers may also need assistance with product keys in these scenarios. So if the product key wasn't written down and is now needed to complete setup, then what they can do is just go look at the receipt or the email that they received to get at the product key. And they can also go through the media creation steps to create an ISO file. Mainly because at the end of the ISO file creation, we're going to display the product key to you, and you can use that as the opportunity to write it down. Now, if web setup was restarted or temporary folder was overwritten, losing the purchase context before completing the download, then we should recommend that they go look again at the receipt or the email that they received to get the product key. And then if they don't have either of those, then refer the customer to the retailer for assistance if the email was lost. So if they purchased it from Amazon, refer them back to Amazon to go get that product key again. So download issues related to web setup are generally going to manifest with one of the following symptoms. Either the download progress is stuck at 0% or another percentage for a very long time. This could be because web setup uses the bits download engine, and you can approach troubleshooting for download issues as you would Windows Update download errors. The percentage at which a failure happens will vary depending on the issue, and also depending on the specific version and language of Windows being downloaded. If you get the error message, "We can't connect right now," verify your internet connectivity, troubleshooting any issues you find. Look to see if you're having any issues related to downloading files or accessing websites in general from Internet Explorer. If you have additional networking issues going on, then those will likely also manifest themselves as a problem with downloading during setup. If you see an error, download did not complete successfully, this could be caused by a previous download attempt that was ended unexpectedly, like by ending the process or rebooting the PC. If you see the error download interrupted, a customer may report that something interrupted the download and that they may be unsure of how to proceed. So if the download process is interrupted for any reason, you can use the Download Windows shortcut on the desktop to resume. For the problem scenarios we just talked about, you can generally proceed using these steps you see here on the screen. Find out if the download was interrupted without an error. If it was, locate the Download Windows shortcut and use it to resume the download. Was it a transient error? If so, then just recommend that they try again unless the error has been shown for several times over a period of days, although at that point I don't know that it would be called transient. For other issues, just restart the download. So close the Upgrade Assistant interface. It may take 2 to 3 minutes for this process to end, even after the window closes. This should only be an issue though if you try to restart web setup like immediately, or you attempt to delete the web setup folder soon after closing the window, because there's still a process that's loaded and active and holding an open handle into a file in that folder, so you wouldn't be able to delete it. So also clear the bits queue to start a fresh download. This can be done with the command bits admin slash reset slash all users, bits admin slash reset slash all users, and that will clear out your bits queue and cause the download job to restart. Now, when you're talking about troubleshooting and the web setup folder, never delete the web setup temporary directory in Microsoft Web Setup. This folder contains reference information used to resume the download and retain the purchase context so that the customer isn't asked for their payment information again. So things like the product key that was saved whenever they purchased Windows is saved in that folder, and they would lose that product key at that point. So the next section is on starting, setup, or creating media. So if you're seeing any problems starting, setup, or creating media, if you see that install now is failing, try using the install later option to pause web setup and then restart the PC, and then use the install Windows shortcut on the desktop, resulting in a scenario where you've just rebooted. Hopefully that'll be enough to resolve whatever transient issue you were encountering. If the installation continues to experience issues, though, it may be best to create installation media and perform a clean install. Setup isn't recommended on a Windows installation where you're currently having problems, so if you are currently having problems, there's a high likelihood that you'll just bring those problems forward whenever you attempt to upgrade. Any issues related to burning an ISO to a DVD, this is not going to be any different from troubleshooting any other form of DVD burning. Everything you know about troubleshooting that category of issues is going to apply here. If you're seeing any issues creating the USB installation source, there's a few things you need to check. First, check the attributes of the USB flash drive. So the Upgrade Assistant is automatically going to try to format the flash drive as FAT32. But if you have a flash drive that's larger than 32 gigabytes, then you've exceeded the maximum size of a FAT32 based file system. So it'll attempt to create that partition that takes up the entire drive. It's going to fail, and then it's going to fail. So there's also a minimum size of 3 gigs. So maximum 32 gigs, minimum 3 gigs. So what I would do in that case, in the case where the Upgrade Assistant is failing to create the USB flash drive, because it's something like a 64 gig USB key, what I would do is I would open up DiskPart and manually create a 32 gig partition, or 16, or something smaller than the 32. But still large enough to hold the setup files. I'd manually create that partition using DiskPart, mark it as active, assign it a drive letter, quick format it as FAT32, and then just extract the contents of the ISO to the USB key. And at that point, you've got a bootable USB key that you can use to perform Windows installations. You could also try things like plugging it into a different USB port, or just testing with a completely different flash drive. It may be that your flash drive is having problems. Okay. Alright, so troubleshooting other issues. So the troubleshooting steps you use for Windows 7, as we mentioned, are going to continue to apply. There are a few changes that we need to talk through. One of them is related to media issues. This could be errors related to bad media, like DVD driver errors or hangs during setup. These should be less common because of the use of web setup. If you see these issues when a customer has burned a Windows 8 DVD, it still relates to issues with the media. Recommend using the web setup process to install where possible. It provides automatic download and verification and repair. Now, if web setup is not an option and the customer needs to download an ISO file and burn media, check the integrity of the burnt media to ensure there's not an issue in downloading or burning. Any product key issues? So Windows 8 doesn't prompt for a product key in several cases where Windows 7 did, as it can receive the key automatically from web setup or from the OEM Windows 8 PC BIOS during a reinstall. In cases where the key is not provided automatically, Windows 8 requires you to enter a key during setup. These changes make it much less likely that you'll encounter issues related to a mismatch between the key and the product installed. Alright, now processor compatibility issues. The new processor requirements in Windows 8 could lead to questions from customers. There's not a workaround to install Windows 8 on a PC that doesn't meet these CPU capability requirements. So if for some reason setup does not block installation on a PC with an incompatible CPU, you can expect to see that stop 5D unsupported processor error. If this is encountered during an upgrade, the rollback process should return the PC to Windows 7. If it's encountered during another type of installation, it would be best to return the PC to its previous Windows version using the windows.old folder. You can also recommend that NX be enabled in the BIOS if possible. This should permit Windows 8 to start. But if a customer needs assistance determining how to enable NX, they need to contact their PC manufacturer for specific instructions on getting into their particular BIOS. Related to device and driver issues, these were often related to drivers migrated from the previous Windows installation. This type of issue could appear in Windows 7 as one of the following symptoms: hangs late in setup, particularly at 62% during an upgrade install, a reboot loop, or hangs at completing installation. Windows 8 doesn't show the same style of progress tracking, so these issues can show different symptoms, and on Windows 8 these issues are more likely to show one of these symptoms. So you'll see something like hang during getting devices ready or hangs at completing installation. Troubleshooting is going to stay the same after rollback. Focus on simplifying hardware configuration and uninstalling unneeded drivers from Device Manager. If upgrade continues to fail, Windows 8 provides migration options that can help us get customers' PCs installed in Windows 8 with their files and user accounts. Okay. Now, I mentioned the rollback feature earlier. We're automatically going to roll back the installation of Windows if you encounter an error during setup where you've chosen the option for full upgrade, meaning Windows settings, personal files, and apps, and if a failure occurs prior to Windows Welcome. If both of those are true, the rollback process will kick in, and what you'll see is, and it's kind of small text, but here it says that an error occurred during Windows installation. Attempting to recover. Do not restart your computer during this time. Rollback is most commonly seen during device installation due to a problem with the device driver or the device itself, or while setup is attempting to restore user files and settings. Next, we're going to talk about choosing migration specifics. So some customers may want to choose which elements of their configuration are migrated to Windows 8. Using the what do you want to keep options in setup doesn't give users the chance to select specific user accounts, paths, setting types, and other detailed options. If a user prefers to choose their migrated elements more specifically and granularly, they can still use Windows Easy Transfer with the same experience as was provided in Windows 7. They can access Windows Easy Transfer by opening up the support/migwiz folder on the Windows 8 installation media and running migsetup.exe. This will enable the user to gather specific data and settings needed from the previous Windows 8 installation or old PC. You can take that migsetup.exe from the Windows 8 installation media and run it on your down-level Windows 7, Windows Vista, or Windows XP based PC to gather the data and settings off of that for application to your Windows 8 PC. Alright. The next thing we talked through was migration failures. So if a customer reports that Windows 8 setup didn't preserve file settings or apps as they thought it should, you can use the windows.old folder as a source for information and recovery. You can do this to a much greater degree than with Windows 7 due to the increased usage of windows.old and Windows 8. Windows 8 preserves the previous Windows installations in a windows.old folder. Regardless of the migration method selected, this means that you can generally recover the previous installation by restoring the contents of windows.old to the root of that drive. This also gives support a significantly simplified ability to help recover missing data files after setup was run, particularly after an upgrade. So we now have this scheduled task. Here, let me bring that up. There is one change to the way that the windows.old folder is managed in Windows 8 compared with Windows 7. On Windows 8, when install.exe creates a windows.old folder, there is a scheduled task added in the new Windows 8 installation. The scheduled task, called Setup Cleanup Task, removes the windows.old folder contents when either of the following are true. If it's been 28 days since Windows was installed, or if the Windows drive has less than 10% free space, then if either of those are true, then what is going to happen is that all of the subfolders are going to be removed from the windows.old folder with the exception of users. So that means Windows, program files x86, program data, all of those are going to be removed. If you want to remove the remaining contents of this folder, or if you want to remove the windows.old folder prior to the scheduled task executing, you can use the previous Windows installation options in disk cleanup. Let me show you what that looks like real quick. Actually, I'm not going to have that option here, but what I do is go into the disk cleanup utility. And this is useful if you ever need to delete a windows.old folder. We talk about this in the Windows New Hire training that you also have access to, but the windows.old folder that has this old copy of Windows has files that are permissioned such that even administrators don't have the ability to modify or delete them. The owner on them, I believe, is set as trusted installer, which is a user account that's special for Windows, and because it's just the nature of that account makes it to where, and the permissions associated with that folder makes it to where you can't delete the files without a ton of access denied errors. So what you can do instead is just go into disk cleanup, because the disk cleanup utility has the ability to remove a windows.old folder regardless of the permissions. Now, I don't believe that I have a windows.old folder, but if I did, then it would be in this list. Yeah, I don't have one. I had already removed mine. Okay, cancel out of that. Alright, so that brings us to a lab. So because this is a video, it's difficult for us to have that back and forth interaction that a lab normally would require. So my recommendation for you is that you pause the video, or it's finishing at the end of the setup module here, and then look in the web version of the training for the lab, especially the exercise, the upgrade exercise that is listed, and go through that and make sure that you're comfortable with everything that's talked about in the lab, and that you are able to successfully go through all the steps, and that you end up with a Windows 8 installation, because that's going to be necessary for the later parts of this training. But yeah, good luck with the lab, and our next module will be activation.